The air inside the Whispering Pines community hall smelled like overpriced lilies, slow-roasted beef, and the cloying desperation of people who still believed rules could buy respect. String lights dripped from the rustic beams like cheap gold necklaces, casting that perfect Instagram glow over everything except the truth. A 12-piece band played soft jazz, covers of songs older than most of the mortgages here. In the center of the dance floor, bathed in a spotlight that cost the HOA Treasury way too much, stood Carol Vance, the self-appointed queen of our little gated kingdom, and her husband Greg. They looked like minor royalty at their own coronation, shaking hands with the fervor of people who'd never once paid their own late fees. Tonight was the Whispering Pines HOA 35th Anniversary Gala, a celebration of enduring community values, or, as I like to call it, the annual reminder that some people's lawns were more important than other people's lives. I wasn't standing with them. I wasn't circulating with a crystal flute of champagne, accepting compliments on my dress, or pretending the unseasonably warm weather was the most fascinating topic in the room. I was squeezed at a narrow, wobbling folding table shoved into the corner right beside the donation station. To my left, a tower of ribboned envelopes threatened to topple every time the bass hit. To my right, a tacky plastic box shaped like a three-tiered wedding cake sat open and hungry, waiting for checks that would supposedly fund beautification projects. In front of me, a tablet glowed with a color-coded spreadsheet I'd built in 40 minutes flat. I was dressed in a sharp black blazer that screamed corporate executioner. Yet every relative, every neighbor, treated me like the hired help checking coats. In Whispering Pines, there were only two roles available. You were either the decoration in the neighborhood photo, shining and useless and celebrated, or you were the utility behind the scenes, the load-bearing beam nobody ever thanked. I had never been the decoration. Aunt Linda, who still owed 3 years of unpaid assessments, leaned over and dropped a thick cream envelope onto the pile without looking me in the eye. "Oh, Harper, you're such a dear for handling this. Make sure Carol and Greg get this one right away. Okay, it's generous." Her voice pitched high and fake, the same tone she used when complaining about my bird feeder being an eyesore. I tapped the screen, logging it with professional detachment. Logged. Aunt Linda. She patted my shoulder like I was a golden retriever and drifted toward the open bar. Another neighbor I hadn't spoken to since the Great Flag Color War of 2023 slid a card across the tablecloth and gave me a thumbs up. "Thanks for manning the fort. Harp, better you than me, right?" They thanked me for guarding the donation box, as if I were a teenager earning allowance money. Nobody asked why the woman who had single-handedly kept the community pool from being condemned was sitting alone in the corner. They simply accepted that this was my natural habitat, adjacent to the money but never allowed to touch it. Across the room, Carol's son Ethan was holding a Jeroboam of champagne like it was the Stanley Cup. Flashbulbs popped. He threw his head back laughing at something a neighbor's daughter said. Teeth blindingly white. Teeth I'd quietly paid the orthodontist bill for when Carol forgot. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than my annual HOA dues. I knew because the invoice was filed in the pending payments folder on my laptop, hidden beneath the white polyester tablecloth. A shadow fell over my spreadsheet. Carol herself swept past, pausing not to ask if I needed a drink, but to aggressively smooth a wrinkle in a nearby cocktail napkin. She finally glanced at me, eyes scanning for flaws. Not affection. "Smile. Honey," she hissed through teeth fixed in permanent photo-ready mode. "You're in the background of the photos. We wouldn't want to ruin the aesthetic." I kept my voice low and steady. "Wouldn't want to ruin the aesthetic." She leaned closer. The way people talk to staff they don't want overheard. "Harper, make sure nobody walks off with the envelopes. You know how people get after a few drinks. Keep a count. I'm counting everything." "Carol," I said, Every single penny. Good girl. She floated away satisfied. Under the lapel of my blazer, clipped to the silk lining, was the matte black head of a wireless microphone. It was live, synced to the venue sound system with an override code I'd memorized while the audio techs were on lunch. My leather laptop bag under the table held no sentimental scrapbooks. It held 3 heavy folders: deed, management agreement, payment history. They sat there like loaded weapons. Carol and Greg thought I was here for donation duty. They thought I was the compliant neighbor, the quiet fix-it girl who cleaned up their messes so the stars could keep shining. They thought I was guarding their pile of checks. They were wrong. I wasn't here to facilitate a party. I was here to facilitate a hostile takeover. To understand how a 32-year-old woman ends up glued to the donation table at her own community's anniversary gala. You have to understand the suffocating architecture of Whispering Pines, HOA. It was the kind of neighborhood where the grass was dyed greener in summer and the cars in every driveway were leased, never owned. Inside those perfectly painted fences, appearances weren't a priority, they were a religion. And Carol Vance was its high priestess. There was a distinct, unspoken hierarchy to our community needs. Ethan Vance, 5 years my junior, was the golden calf, the investment vehicle Carol was betting her legacy on. For Ethan, the checkbook was always magically open. When he wanted a new basketball hoop that violated 3 separate setback rules, suddenly the HOA budget had room. When he needed help fixing his illegal backyard hot tub, funds appeared from thin air. But for me, recession-era rules only. I've been fined $250 for my American flag being 2 inches too large. Fined again for my bird feeder being visually disruptive. Fined a 3rd time for parking my sensible sedan in my own driveway because the color didn't complement the neighborhood palette. I remember being 26, working late at my finance firm in the city, when Carol called me in a panic. The HOA was days away from a massive lawsuit. Poor maintenance on the community retention pond had flooded 3 homes. Insurance denied everything. The bank was circling. Carol cried on the phone about how the embarrassment would kill her. We can't lose the neighborhood. Harper, you're so good with numbers. Just help us this once. It wasn't a request. It was a hostage situation wrapped in neighborly concern. So I did what I always did. I formed Harbor Lane Holdings LLC with my own savings and a private loan. I bought the HOA's debt from the bank. I paid off the $187,000 in arrears and another $92,000 for emergency repairs. In exchange, the board, led by Carol, signed a deed in lieu of foreclosure agreement at a midnight notary meeting. They were so relieved they barely glanced at the papers. We trust you. Harper, Carol had gushed, dabbing at fake tears. Your family. They never asked who owned Harbor Lane Holdings. They assumed because I was the quiet resident who always fixed things. Anything I did was ultimately for them. For 2 years, I let them believe it. I let Carol keep calling herself president. I let her post victory selfies on the neighborhood Facebook page about saving our community. I paid the property taxes, the insurance, the major repairs through the LLC while she kept the petty cash from events to fund her designer handbags and Ethan's new truck. I held the deed in my safe like a nuclear option I hoped I'd never need. Until 3 days ago, I was on my couch with a glass of Pinot Noir when an email from Carol Vance 1965@outlook.com slid across my screen. Subject: Forward. Draft for the big night. Review ASAP. Classic reply all blunder. The message was addressed to Ethan and her inner circle cousin Mia. But I've been CC'd by accident. Here's the final draft for the announcement. Dad and I think this covers everything. We'll do the big reveal right after the cake. It's finally time to put Whispering Pines in the right hands. Don't worry about the legal jargon. Harper will help with the paperwork on the night of the party, since she's good with numbers anyway. She'll sign off as the witness, and then it's done. The legacy stays with the name. Love. Mom. Attached. Transfer agreement draft v4.pdf. I opened it. The crude Google template document outlined Carol and Greg transferring all management rights, operational control, and future profits of the common areas and clubhouse to Ethan Vance, effective immediately after the gala. A salary for Ethan higher than my first 3 years in finance. Final say on all rules, fines, and renovations. And on the last page, a witness signature block with my name pre-typed in small, unassuming letters. They were planning to use my signature to validate the theft of my own property. I sat there in the dark and laughed, the dry, humorless sound of the guillotine blade dropping. Carol had forgotten the one detail she never bothered to read. The deed wasn't hers. Whispering Pines common property legally belonged to Harbor Lane Holdings, and Harbor Lane Holdings belonged to me. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't call Carol screaming. I simply forwarded it to my encrypted address, created a new folder titled Anniversary Contingency Plan, and started downloading every document I'd kept for 2 years, the original deed, the signed management agreement, bank transfer records, the operating agreement where Carol and Greg acknowledged their tenancy. The next morning, I sat across from Marta Delaney, Pitbull real estate attorney, 40 floors above the city. I slid the folder across the mahogany table. Marta scanned the documents behind her tortoise-shell glasses and raised one perfectly arched eyebrow. So let me get this straight, she said smoothly. The HOA president is planning a public ceremony to gift community property she doesn't own to a son who has no legal claim, using a document drafted by Google. And she expects you, the woman who actually owns it, to sign as witness. Looks like it. Marta leaned back. Legally, Carol and Greg Vance are tenants. Generous ones, but tenants. You bought the debt. You paid off $279,000 total. The title to all common areas belongs to Harbor Lane Holdings, solely, exclusively yours. Hearing it stripped of guilt and neighborly gaslighting was jarring. I nodded. I never wanted to rub their noses in it. I'll let them keep their titles, their Facebook posts, their little kingdom. I thought if I handled the scary stuff in the background, they'd eventually see me. You protected their egos, Marta corrected gently. And look where it got you. They're 6 months behind on the symbolic lease payments you set at 20% of market value. Yet they still host 12 events a quarter and pocket the revenue. They're planning to give away your asset. We spent 2 hours mapping the strategy. Not revenge, correction. Step 1, revenue lock. As of this morning, every card swiped at the bar, every donation, every future booking deposit would route straight into the Harbor Lane account. Carol couldn't withdraw a cent without my digital countersign. Step 2, new documents. Marta drafted a fresh management agreement converting Carol and Greg from owners to salaried facility managers on a 1-year probation. Strict salary. No more dipping into the till. Ethan? 0 equity. 0 authority. If he wanted to work here, he could apply for the assistant groundskeeper position. Step 3, delivery. They'll ambush you on stage, Marta warned. Social pressure is their weapon. Don't cause a scene, deliver a verdict. I left that office feeling lighter than I had in years. The city below looked different. Just structures built on foundations. And I had the paperwork. Back at the gala, the afternoon sun cut through the high windows in sharp, dusty beams. I arrived at 4 p.m. in a black silk jumpsuit and structured blazer that cost more than Carol's first car. My leather bag was heavy with the folders and a silver USB drive labeled receipts. Carol spotted me immediately, shoved a roll of scotch tape and cheap pins in my chest. Oh good, you're here. The tape on the donation table is peeling. Go fix it, honey, and set up the car box. Make one of your little spreadsheets. She turned her back before I could say hello. I walked to the corner they'd assigned me, the spot where you put the ugly cousin or the overflow coats. I sat in the cold metal chair. opened my laptop, and refreshed the Harbor Lane banking portal. At 4:45, the catering manager, David, approached, whispering, "The bar manager says we're short 2 cases of Prosecco. Can we substitute?" "Substitute it," I said smoothly. "And hold the appetizers 10 minutes. The band's running late." David exhaled in relief. "I don't know how this place runs without you." "Neither do they," I replied. Across the room, Carol was directing a fern placement with the intensity of an air traffic controller. Ethan strutted in 45 minutes late, wearing a rented tux like he already owned the place. Greg roared, "There he is, the man of the hour." Someone handed Ethan champagne before he'd even taken off his coat. I refreshed the portal again. The catering payment had just processed straight into my account. The money train had already derailed. It just hadn't felt the crash yet. The doors opened. Guests flooded in, sequins and cologne and loud laughter. They drifted toward me, dropping envelopes, patting my shoulder like I was the help. "Here you go, dear. Make sure they see this one. Working hard. Harper." I smiled, logged every gift, stacked them neatly. The perfect, obedient neighbor. But my hand rested on the leather bag. Inside were the folders that would end the fairy tale. The MC's voice boomed. "In just a little bit, we have a huge surprise, a legacy moment you'll never forget. The Vance family has a big announcement about the future of Whispering Pines." The room buzzed. Whispers rippled. "I bet they're retiring." "No, they're giving the whole HOA to Ethan." I looked at the donation table groaning under envelopes. $10,000 in cash and checks meant to fund Carol's retirement or Ethan's next vacation. I started a new list, not for thank you notes, but for receipts I would personally send. "Dear Aunt Linda, thank you for your generous gift. It has been applied directly to the principal balance, preventing this community from being seized by the county." Ethan sauntered over, dropped 3 more envelopes like trash. "Heavy haul tonight." "Huh, good thing you're here to count it. I'd probably lose half of it." He grinned, smelling of the champagne I'd just paid for. "Enjoy playing secretary tonight, because once we make the announcement, things are going to change. I'm going to modernize this place. You won't have to worry about all this paperwork anymore. I'll take it from here." I kept my voice neutral. "You're going to modernize the operations?" "Oh yeah," he said, dreamy conqueror gaze sweeping the room. "Outsource the boring stuff. Focus on the brand. Dad says I have vision for the big picture. The legacy stuff." I looked at him, really looked. Not malicious, just blissfully ignorant. He believed money grew on trees and responsibility was for the help. "The big picture is expensive, Ethan. That's what the revenue is for. Sis." He winked. "Money comes, money goes. You just keep the party moving." He sauntered away, high-fiving cousins. David appeared at my side again. "Hey, the final scheduled payment just processed through the Harbor Lane account. Your dad asked if I got the check he mailed last week." I told him it was all settled electronically. "Let him believe in magic for 1 more hour," I said. David nodded. "You're the boss." The sun set. The room transformed into golden magic, a beautiful lie. The MC cut the music. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention on the dance floor. We have reached the highlight of our evening. A moment 35 years in the making." Lights dimmed. A single harsh spotlight hit Carol and Greg. Carol clung to his arm, dabbing dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. A slideshow began, grainy wedding photos, baby pictures of Ethan, family vacations where I was the one holding the camera and paying the bill. I was nowhere in the narrative. Greg took the mic. "When Carol and I started this journey, we didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. We built this community on sacrifice." I sat perfectly still. Sacrifice. I wondered if he remembered the sacrifice of my tuition money, my credit, my weekends fixing their mistakes. "But a legacy isn't a legacy if it ends with you," he continued theatrically. "You have to pass it on. Carol stepped forward. Ethan, come out here. Ethan strutted into the light, holding the giant gold key like a trophy. The crowd applauded. This isn't just a symbol, Greg shouted. We're making it official tonight. We're transferring management and control of Whispering Pines, HOA, to our son Ethan. He will carry the Vance name forward. The applause faltered. Heads turned toward my corner. Carol scanned the dark until she found me. And of course we couldn't do the paperwork without our little actuary Harper. Honey, come on up here. Help us with the boring forms. You know we're hopeless with the fine print. The MC chuckled. Every family, every neighborhood needs one responsible one, right? Let's hear it for the big sister. I stood. I picked up my leather bag. I walked toward the light, heels clicking on the hardwood floor I had paid to refinish last year. Click, click, click. I kept my face pleasant, professional, the consultant arriving to mitigate disaster. When I reached the center, the spotlight burned hot. Greg clapped a hand on my shoulder. Our Harper, always looking out for the details. He slid the cream envelope toward me. We just need you to witness the transfer. Honey, make it legal so we can get back to the party. I took the envelope. I felt the thickness. They thought they were handing me my own death warrant. I opened the flap and slid the documents out. But 2 hours earlier, while Carol screamed at the DJ, I had swapped the contents. The paper I now held was Marta's masterpiece. I pretended to skim. Page 1. Harper Lane Holdings LLC acknowledged as sole proprietor. Page 2. Carol and Greg retained as facility managers on probation. Page 3. Ethan Bell recognized as non-equity guest with zero authority. I looked up and met Ethan's eyes. He grinned like a lottery winner, clutching his useless gold key. Just the signature line on the back. Harp, Ethan nudged. Don't overthink it. It's just standard stuff. Standard stuff? I repeated. My voice carried over the microphone Greg still held near me. The room heard every word. I uncapped the pen. I signed in a clean hand. Harper Bell. I placed my hand firmly on top of the document. There, Greg boomed. Relieved. It's done. The neighborhood belongs to Ethan. The crowd cheered, confused. Thinner. I turned to the MC, gently took the microphone from his hand. Carol whispered, smile faltering. Harper, what are you doing? We need to cut the cake. I stepped away from them, alone in the spotlight, hand resting on the bag full of receipts. I'm sorry, I said, voice ringing clear and steady. I just have one small correction to make before we cut the cake. Greg's face went slack. Harper, sit down, he growled low. I smiled, the first genuine smile all night. You asked me to handle the paperwork. Carol. So I did. The trap was sprung. I walked back toward the donation table, the crowd parting like a wave. I set the mic down, pulled my heavy bag up, unzipped it with a sharp sound. I lifted the red folder labeled deed. Then the blue management agreement. Then the green payment history. I fanned them out on the table. I'm not just good with numbers, I said into the mic I'd reclaimed. I'm not just the helpful neighbor who organizes spreadsheets. I am Harper Lane Holdings. Ethan laughed, a wet choking sound. Okay, very dramatic. Harp. But come on, Harper Lane is just a shell company, right? It's just a legal technicality so we could refinance. You're making it sound like a hostile takeover. It's neighborhood business. It's all the same pot. It's not the same pot. Ethan, I said calmly. And it's not a technicality. I opened the red folder, slid out the original deed with the Rays County seal. I'm going to read from paragraph 4, section B of the transfer of title dated 2 years ago. The grantors, Carol and Gregory Vance, hereby convey and warrant to the grantee Harper Lane Holdings LLC the real property known as Whispering Pines Common Areas. In fee simple absolute, the grantors acknowledge they retain no equity, interest, or claim to the property herein. I looked up. For those of you who don't speak lawyer, That means Carol and Greg Vance sold this community 2 years ago. They do not own the clubhouse. They do not own the pool. They do not own the roads you drive on. I do. The room erupted into a roar. Aunt Linda covered her mouth. David, the catering manager, nodded with grim satisfaction. Carol lunged for the mic, but the sound guy was frozen. This is a lie, Greg shouted without amplification. She's confused. We have a deal. We have an understanding. We have a lease, I corrected. Voice amplified. A lease you're 6 months behind on. A lease you violated every single day by pretending you still own this place. I picked up a gold envelope from the pile. You seated me here because you wanted to remind me of my place. You wanted me to guard the donations. You wanted me to act like the servant. It's funny. You were so busy trying to put me in the corner that you forgot the person sitting at the donation table is the only one who knows how to pay the bills. I held up the document I had just signed. You all think I just witnessed a transfer to Ethan. I didn't. I signed your employment contract. Effective immediately, Harper Lane Holdings is retaining Carol and Greg Vance as on-site facility managers. You're now employees. You have a fixed salary and a 1-year probationary period. Ethan has 0 equity, 0 authority. If he wants to work here, he can apply for assistant groundskeeper. We're hiring. Greg erupted, storming toward me. You ungrateful little. I didn't flinch. I'm not ungrateful. Carol, I'm exhausted. You spent 35 years taking credit for things you didn't earn. Tonight the bill finally came due. I packed the folders back into my bag. As of tonight, the Bank of Harper is closed. No more midnight wires. No more covered assessments. No more silent bailouts. If you need money, you can request an advance on your salary. My accountant is very thorough. I slid a slim white envelope across the table. That's a residential lease agreement for the house you currently live in. Lifetime lease at 40% market rate. Generous. But you stop claiming ownership and you treat me as your landlord and employer with the respect that entails. Carol's mascara ran in black rivers. Harper, please, we're family. I looked at her hand gripping my wrist, the same hand that had signed me up for every fine, every extra assessment, every public shaming. I pried her fingers off one by one, gently but with immovable force. His moment is over. This is reality. I picked up the mic one last time. Every dollar collected tonight will be applied directly to the principal debt of Whispering Pines. It will keep this community standing for the next 10 years, not vacations, not kitchen remodels, not anyone's image. I slung the bag over my shoulder. It felt lighter. I turned toward the exit. The crowd parted. Behind me, the band awkwardly struck up, "We Are Family." The irony was perfect. I paused at the double doors. Cool night, air smelling of rain and asphalt. I didn't look back at Carol sobbing over the lease. Ethan clutching his plastic key. Greg purple-faced and powerless. I looked at the building itself, the beams, the stone, the structure I had saved. "You're welcome," I whispered to the house. Then I stepped out. The door swung shut behind me, muffling the music, muffling the sobbing, muffling 32 years of noise. In the parking lot, my car waited under a street lamp, paid for with my own money. I got in, flipped my phone face down on the incoming messages, and drove into the darkness. For the first time, the road ahead was completely, beautifully mine.